In this class, let us learn about three more types of hemolytic anemias, namely sickle cell anemia, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency anemia, and immune hemolytic anemias. The objectives of this class are to understand the cause, mechanism, clinical features, and laboratory diagnosis of sickle cell anemia. The second objective is to learn about glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency and its features. The third is to learn about hemolytic disease of newborn. And the last objective is to understand the types of autoimmune hemolytic anemia and the differences between those two types. Let us start the discussion with sickle cell disease first. Sickle cell disease is a group of disorders which cause hemolytic anemias over a long period of time, and this disease is due to the inheritance of an abnormal beta globin gene, that is the sickle beta globin gene. This is a widely distributed disease, and in the map shown, the solid green color represents the geographic locations of sickle cell anemia. We can clearly see that India has some patients of sickle cell anemia. Like I said earlier, sickle cell disease is a group, and this group comprises of, first one is sickle cell anemia, which is the homozygous disease. This is the severe disease. Second one is the sickle cell trait, which is a very mild form of the disease. And there are other variants with mixtures between sickle cell gene and HBC, sickle cell and alpha thalassemia, and sickle cell and beta thalassemia. These are heterozygous states also, and severity varies. When you go through the textbook, you will come across these two terms. Firstly, sickle cell disease. The second is sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell disease is a group of disorders, whereas sickle cell anemia is the severest form of that group. So sickle cell disease will include sickle cell anemia, but not the other way around. It has all the entities in which hemoglobin is capable of undergoing sickling, whereas sickle cell anemia is just a homozygous state and leads to a severe disease. Coming to sickle cell anemia, it's the most common form of this sickle cell disease group, and it's a homozygous condition. By that, what I mean is that both the genes which code for beta globin chain, those are both defective. HbS, or the abnormal hemoglobin that is seen in sickle cell disease, that was the first abnormal hemoglobin to be discovered out of all the disorders which have defective hemoglobins. Let us see what is the cause for this sickle cell anemia. Basically, what happens is there is a single base change in the gene that codes for this beta globin chain, wherein adenine will go off and thymine will come. Because of this, the sequence is changed, and at the sixth position of beta globin chain, instead of glutamic acid, which is normally there, valine will come. So that leads to formation of a defective hemoglobin, which is the hemoglobin S, or HbS. Just a small comparison between thalassemia and sickle cell anemia. In a normal individual, when we see, the hemoglobin will have two alpha chains and two beta chains. In beta thalassemia, the beta chain will be deficient, so you end up with a relative excess of alpha chains. In alpha thalassemia, alpha chain is deficient, hence you'll end up with a relative excess of beta chains. In sickle cell anemia, although alpha and beta chains are there, the beta chain which is present is abnormal, so that is denoted by superscript of S. So alpha 2 and beta S2, two alpha chains and two beta S chains. So that is the composition of HbS, or sickle cell hemoglobin. Moving on to the mechanism of the disease or the pathogenesis, what happens is whenever there is deoxygenation, there is a conformational change exposing a small area in the hemoglobin, that is the beta chain. This binds to a complementary site in another hemoglobin molecule, leading to polymerization. So when many beta chains bind to each other, what happens is a polymerization will happen. That polymerization is what leads to the sickle shape of the RBC. There is something known as deoxygenation polymerization gap. This DP gap basically is the time taken between the deoxygenation period to start and the polymerization to develop. During this period of this deoxygenation polymerization gap, the hemoglobin in the RBC is still in a soluble form. That is why the shape does not change during this period. Why we need to know this DP gap is there are some factors which reduce the deoxygenation polymerization gap. So those factors are increase in 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. Then we have a reduction in pH or acidosis, and also we have increased concentration of HbS, that is sickle hemoglobin. This is a diagrammatic representation of the mechanism we just discussed. So in the right side image we have one RBC. In that RBC there are numerous molecules of hemoglobin, so each one there is a molecule, and the zoomed version of that is one hemoglobin molecule wherein you'll be seeing 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. So according to the mechanism of sickle cell anemia, there is first should be deoxygenation. Once deoxygenation occurs, there will be some sites which are exposed. The knob-like structure you are seeing on the hemoglobin molecule, that is the patch where valine had replaced glutamate. So that area will go on and bind to other complementary sites in the beta globin chain, leading to formation of a polymer. That polymer in turn will keep increasing in size to reach a critical mass, after which it will change the shape of the RBC into a sickle shape. Moving on, there are two types of sickle cells. The first is a reversible sickle cell, in which if oxygen supply is back to normal, the shape of the RBC will change back from a sickle into a biconcave shape. The second is an irreversible sickle cell whose shape will not turn back to normal even if deoxygenation is settled down. If the concentration of fetal hemoglobin in an RBC is more, then that RBC is likely to become a reversible sickle cell. If there is repeated or prolonged sickling in an RBC, then decoupling of the membrane can occur, leading to an irreversible sickle cell. And some membrane changes are also associated, because of which the sickle cells are no more reversible. Moving further in the mechanism of sickle cell anemia, we should understand what will happen because of this sickled cell. Two things happen. The first is hemolysis and the second is vessel occlusion. Under hemolysis, both type of hemolysis, that is extravascular as well as intravascular hemolysis, take place. However, the more common one is extravascular hemolysis, in which these abnormal RBCs will undergo destruction by macrophages in the spleen predominantly and also in the liver. Complement mediated destruction of RBCs is the reason for intravascular hemolysis. Also, the problem with sickle cells and their precursors, which are reticulocytes containing the sickled hemoglobin, they have a propensity to stick to the wall of the blood vessel. And when they start sticking to the wall of the blood vessel, they will cause obstruction in the blood vessel, leading to reduced blood supply to various organs, which causing hypoxia and necrosis of various organs. Clinically, this sickle cell anemia will present after 6 months of age because till 6 months of age, fetal hemoglobin, that is HbF, it will be there and it is protective. Most of the symptoms of sickle cell anemia are due to hemolysis. However, there are also vaso-occlusive symptoms. There will be delay in the growth of the child because oxygen is essential for the growth of tissue. And in vaso-occlusive features, we'll get splenic infarct. Eventually, the spleen will shrink in size, which is what is called autosplenectomy. In eye, small vessels of retina can be occluded, giving rise to retinal detachment. In kidney, there could be papillary necrosis. There could be bone infarcts with Salmonella osteomyelitis. There could be lower limb ulcers, and there could also be an infarct in the brain. Apart from these, there are two crises known as aplastic crisis and hemolytic crisis. In aplastic crisis, what happens is this virus called parvovirus B19. It infects the precursors of RBCs in the bone marrow, causing sudden exacerbation or increase in anemia for up to a period of 10 days. After that, it will resolve on its own. Second is hemolytic crisis. Due to various other reasons, hemolysis can increase, giving to exacerbation of anemia. For diagnosis of sickle cell anemia, let us start first with complete blood count, which will show low hemoglobin ranging from 6 to 9 gram per deciliter. WBC count will usually be high and the neutrophil series will be showing shifted to left, that is precursor cells of neutrophils will be there. Next, platelet count is generally increased. Peripheral smear, when we examine, we will see that there will be variation in the size and shape of the RBCs, which is what is called anisopoikilocytosis. And there will usually be sickle cells, target shaped RBCs, ovalocytes, reticulocytes or polychromatophils, and nucleated RBCs. Howell-Jolly bodies can be seen. WBCs will usually be elevated and platelets will be increased. In the peripheral smear image shown in this slide, there are two arrows pointing to RBCs which are elongated and have tapered ends. So those are nothing but the sickle cells. This is another image of peripheral smear showing a sickle cell. One arrow is pointing at a sickle cell. The second one, the dotted arrow, is pointing at a bluish colored thing that is present within the RBC. So that is a remnant of the nucleus, also known as Howell-Jolly body. If we examine the bone marrow of a patient with sickle cell anemia, obviously there is anemia in the peripheral blood, so the precursor cells of RBCs will be increased, which is called nothing but erythroid hyperplasia. And special test we can do, that is hemoglobin electrophoresis. If we do that, we'll see that hemoglobin A, that is 2 alpha and 2 beta chains, which is present in majority quantity in normal individuals, that will be absent. Instead of that, 80 to 90% of all hemoglobins will be sickled hemoglobin or HbS. Fetal hemoglobin will also be increased and the levels will be around 5 to 15%. The second disease in the sickle cell disease group that we'll be talking about is the sickle cell trait. It is a heterozygous trait with some globin chains are normal, but some globin chains are abnormal or sickled. Usually the patient will not have any anemia, and the peripheral smear also, if you see, it will not show any sickled cells or sickled RBCs. However, some care should be taken in patients who are pregnant, in patients who are undergoing anesthesia, or in patients who are traveling to high altitudes. Let's discuss about two interesting tests for the diagnosis of sickle cell trait. These, if done in sickle cell anemia, will also be positive. Okay. So the first is called the solubility test. So the procedure of this test is basically you take a sample of blood and the RBCs in that sample you have to break. For that you use something known as saponin. So you put saponin in solution, put RBCs, that will break the RBCs. Next what we do is we add one more reagent named sodium dithionite. This dithionite will induce deoxygenation and cause polymerization of the hemoglobin which has come out of the RBCs. And this polymer has a special quality that it changes the refractility of light and will not allow light to pass through it perpendicularly. So if you keep a paper with stripes behind the tubes in a patient having sickling, you will not be able to see the stripes on the paper in the background. Whereas blood of a normal individual, if you take and do the same procedure, there won't be any polymerization and hence the refractility of light is not affected and you will still be able to see the stripes in the background. So one test and one control tube. The other test is called a sickling test. This is particularly useful in sickle cell traits because in sickle cell trait you will not be able to see most of the times any sickle cells in the peripheral smears. So here what you do is you take a drop of blood and you add a drop of 2% sodium metabisulfite to it. Then you incubate it for a while. You put it on top of a glass slide, cover it with the cover slip and seal the edges of the cover slip to ensure that no oxygen from the sides will diffuse into the sample. After this, you have to examine the sample for first 15 minutes, then repeatedly every hour till the end of 24 hours. If a patient has sickle cell trait, you'll be able to see change in the shape of RBC into a sickle shape because this sodium metabisulfite will induce deoxygenation and cause sickling of the RBC. For conclusive diagnosis of this sickle cell trait, we will need to rely on hemoglobin electrophoresis again. However, in contrast to sickle cell anemia, where majority of the hemoglobin we saw was HbS, here it is not so. HbA, that is the normal hemoglobin, will still be at a higher quantity compared to hemoglobin S. It is said that more than 60% of hemoglobin will be HbA and less than 40% of the hemoglobin will be HbS. The next hemolytic anemia we'll be talking about is called glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency anemia. Around 400 million people worldwide are afflicted from this disease and it is found in Africa, Middle East and Southeast Asia. India is a part of that. It is an X-linked disorder, meaning to say that males are affected and females generally are carriers. Numerous mutations have been identified which can lead to this disease. Pathogenesis wise, let us have a brief look into the mechanism how this G6PD enzyme normally acts. There is a mechanism inside the RBC in which a substance called glutathione, it protects the RBC from damage by free radicals. This G6PD enzyme normally will help to regenerate that glutathione. If there is a deficiency of this G6PD enzyme, then what happens is glutathione is not regenerated, and because glutathione is not there anymore, oxygen free radicals will not be removed. When these free radicals are not removed, they will cause damage to both RBC membrane as well as hemoglobin. So this is the basic mechanism of glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. In the flow chart, we can see that this G6PD or glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, it will help in the reduction of NADP to form NADPH. And this NADPH is necessary for the formation or regeneration of glutathione. And if G6PD is deficient, NADPH is not forming properly, and that is why glutathione is not forming. And since glutathione is not forming properly, there is damage to both RBC membrane as well as hemoglobin. The patients who suffer from G6PD deficiency, they do not always have hemolysis. They have hemolysis when the oxidative stress, or the amount, that is the amount of free radicals, are very high. So there are some trigger factors which we need to remember, which are known to generate more oxygen free radicals. So here is a list of it. Some of it which I have highlighted inside a red colored marking. We'll try to remember those. First is infections, which are seen in conditions like diabetic ketoacidosis. Second is a set of drugs, including anti-malarials. Primarily, let us remember chloroquine and primaquine. Then other drugs such as aspirin, if given at a higher dose. Then thirdly, we'll try to remember this product called fava beans. The patients who have this G6PD deficiency generally do not exhibit any symptoms, that is, unless they are exposed to one of those triggers we saw in the table in the previous slide. Once they are exposed to those triggers, there will be a sudden onset of hemolysis leading to anemia. If the deficiency of G6PD is very severe, it can exhibit at a very young age, that is soon after birth, and manifest as neonatal jaundice. For diagnosis of this G6PD deficiency, we should observe a reduction in hemoglobin and RBC count after a trigger factor has acted, and features will include both extravascular and intravascular characteristics. Immediately after trigger factor acts, what happens is RBC membrane and hemoglobin are denatured, and this denatured hemoglobin will precipitate and occupy an eccentric position within the RBC. So at this stage, if you do a supravital stain, you will see something that looks like a ring with a blue colored dot at the edge. So that is what is called a Heinz body. When these RBCs with Heinz bodies, they enter spleen through the circulation, the macrophages in the spleen, what they will do is they will detect the denatured hemoglobin and eat the portion of the RBC where the Heinz body is present, giving rise to what are known as bite cells. So a portion of the RBC is bitten off by the macrophage, giving rise to what is known as a bite cell. So in peripheral smear, if you see bite cell, it will look something like what you see in the image to the right. There are two arrows pointing at bite cells. For the confirmation of this G6PD deficiency anemia, a good test which can be done is G6PD assay, wherein you can directly measure the amount of G6PD enzyme that is present. And characteristically, after a trigger factor acts, the level of G6PD will be very low. Moving ahead, let us now discuss about the last topic, that is immune hemolytic anemias, which contain two important diseases. One is hemolytic disease of newborn, the second is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So immune hemolytic anemias are a group of anemias where hemolysis is mediated by the antibodies that are bound to the RBCs. Hemolytic disease of newborn is the type of immune hemolytic anemia where the antibody that binds to RBC is maternal in nature, whereas autoimmune hemolytic anemia is the type wherein the antibody binding to the RBC is self in nature. Immune hemolytic anemias can be classified as either alloimmune or autoimmune or drug induced. Under alloimmune, we have hemolytic disease of newborn to either Rh or ABO, and we have hemolytic transfusion reactions, which is after transfusing the blood of a donor into a recipient. Then we have autoimmune hemolytic anemia. There are two important types. The first is a warm reactive antibody type. The second is a cold reactive antibody type. First, let us take up this topic, hemolytic disease of newborn, which is very important, particularly the type wherein Rh incompatibility is involved. HDN is incompatibility between mother who does not have a particular antigen and the fetus who has that antigen. Two types are Rh incompatibility and ABO incompatibility. However, Rh incompatibility is a bit more serious in nature. Usually occurs after second pregnancy, that is two or more pregnancy. In first pregnancy, only the exposure occurs. So here what happens is IgG type of antibodies in mother will go and attach to the RBC of the fetus. Coming to the pathogenesis of this hemolytic disease of newborn, what we'll be talking is Rh incompatibility. In first pregnancy, what happens is because of any exposure of fetal RBCs to maternal blood, there will be formation of antibodies. Initially, in maternal blood, that is mother's blood, IgM antibodies will form against the Rh antigen in the fetal RBC. However, this IgM antibody that is formed in the mother is not capable of crossing the placenta into the fetal circulation. That is why the first baby will not have any symptoms usually. In the subsequent pregnancies, what happens is, that is second or more times if mother gets pregnant, IgG antibodies would have formed which are capable of crossing the placenta, attaching to fetal RBCs and giving rise to further steps in the disease. Clinically, this hemolytic disease of newborn is categorized into three types based on the severity. The most severe form is called hydrops fetalis, wherein the fetus dies within the uterus of the mother, that is intrauterine death. The second one is the moderate disease, wherein the child is born but it will have anemia and jaundice. However, if hemolysis is too much and the bilirubin levels are too much, this bilirubin can cross the blood-brain barrier and cause neurological damage in the child, which is what is called kernicterus. In both severe and moderate disease, if you look at the peripheral smear of the fetal blood, too many nucleated RBCs will be there. Other name for nucleated RBCs is erythroblasts. That is why these two diseases together are called erythroblastosis fetalis. The third type of presentation is a mild disease, wherein the child is born with mild anemia. It may or may not have any jaundice. In the image of peripheral smear that you are seeing in this slide, most of the nucleated cells are all nucleated RBCs. In other words, erythroblasts. So that is why the name erythroblastosis fetalis came to be. Diagnosis wise, clinically, hydrops fetalis, that is the severe form of the disease wherein intrauterine death occurs, that child will have features of cardiac failure with too much edema all around the body. And laboratory wise, hemoglobin will be reduced, reticulocytes will be increased, peripheral smear if you do, RBCs will show a normocytic normochromic type of anemia with excessive numbers of nucleated RBCs, polychromatophils, that is reticulocytes, and occasionally some round RBCs known as spherocytes. Direct antiglobin test, that is Coombs test, will usually be positive. Serum bilirubin will be increased, that is unconjugated bilirubin. Lactate dehydrogenase will be increased, LDH. Haptoglobin will be decreased because intravascular hemolysis is occurring. To prevent this disease, in the first pregnancy itself, exposure of fetal RBCs to mother should be minimized and some substances can be injected which will coat the fetal RBCs and make sure that mother will not produce antibodies against the fetal RBCs. Moving on to the last topic, that is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. I already told you what is the difference between autoimmune hemolytic anemia and hemolytic disease of newborn. In autoimmune hemolytic anemia, one's own antibodies will go and attach to one's own RBCs and it will undergo various types of hemolysis. So based on the temperature at which antibody binds to RBC, it is categorized into two types, that is warm type or cold type. In the warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia, this is the most common type of AIHA, and 50 to 70% of all AIHAs will be warm reactive antibody type. The antibody involved here is IgG. So to remember this, G for garam and warm. IgG structure, if you see, it is a Y-shaped structure, simple structure, and two types of warm reactive antibody type AIHA are there. The first type is primary, which has no known cause, and the second type is secondary, which has known causes like SLE, some drugs, and lymphoma. Coming to the mechanism of this warm type AIHA, antibody will go and bind to RBC membrane at 37 degrees Celsius. So that is why it is called warm antibody, because antibody combines with RBC antigen at 37 degrees Celsius. Once the antibody is bound to RBC, two things can happen. One thing is the FC region of the IgG is identified by the macrophages present in the spleen, giving rise to what is known as extravascular hemolysis, or there could be complement fixation leading to intravascular hemolysis. The extravascular hemolysis that takes place in the spleen here is not complete. By this, what I mean is only a portion of the RBC is eaten off wherever the antibody is bound. That is why there is an instability in whatever is left of the RBC, and whatever is left changes its shape into a sphere, and it will become what is called a spherocyte. In warm AIHA, spleen is the major site. That is why you'll be able to see some amount of splenomegaly or enlargement in the size of the spleen. In cold reactive antibody type of AIHA, the antibody that plays a major role is the IgM, and this IgM binds to RBCs at a low temperature, that is 4 to 18 degrees Celsius. That is why this is called cold type of AIHA. Again, here two types are there. One is primary, the other is secondary. Primary type has no known cause, whereas secondary type of AIHA, cold type, has multiple infections as causes, namely mycoplasma pneumonia, infectious mononucleosis, and also some malignancies like lymphoma. Notice the structure of IgM that I've put in the corner of this slide. It is a pentamer. The structure is much complex than what you saw in IgG. IgG was just a Y-shaped antibody, whereas here 5 such things are there here. In cold type AIHA, the majority hemolysis occurring is because of intravascular type of hemolysis, wherein complement fixation occurs and the RBC is destroyed. Only some amount of RBCs undergo destruction in liver and spleen, and clinically patients present with cold induced acrocyanosis because antibodies bind to RBCs at a cold temperature. Coming to the lab investigations of autoimmune hemolytic anemia in general, I've included both warm and cold types in the same investigation list. Hemoglobin will be low, reticulocyte count will be high. Peripheral smear, if you see, in warm reactive type of AIHA, multiple spherocytes will be there because the major site of hemolysis is spleen, that is extravascular. Whereas in cold type of AHA, what you see is RBC agglutination. Since IgM has a pentameric structure, a single antibody can bind to numerous RBCs. That is why they all get aggregated together to form an agglutination. Whereas IgG has a simple structure and one IgG can bind a single RBC. That is why agglutination is not much in warm type, whereas in cold type, agglutination is very prominent. Other investigations include serum bilirubin, which will be elevated, particularly the unconjugated bilirubin. Serum LDH will be increased. Hemoglobinemia, hemoglobinuria, and hemosideruria will be there, which are features of intravascular lysis of RBCs. Then direct antiglobulin test or direct Coombs test is usually positive. To summarize, we learnt about four main disorders today, hemolytic anemias. The first is sickle cell anemia, which is a part of sickle cell disease group. The second disease was G6PD deficiency anemia. The third disease was hemolytic disease of newborn. And the fourth was AIHA. The third and fourth diseases fall under the group of immune hemolytic anemias. Sickle cell anemia, we started with the molecular defect and we saw which amino acid replaced with other amino acid. Then we discussed why the sickling happens and eventually we went on to see why sickling is dangerous. Then we discussed about clinical features, at what age it presents and what are the various crises that can be seen due to what mechanisms. Then we discussed about the lab diagnosis, some special tests like solubility test, sickling test, hemoglobin electrophoresis, etc. In G6PD, we saw the mode of inheritance of the disease. Then we saw clinical features in which triggers induced lots of hemolysis. And in the diagnosis, we saw some important features like Heinz bodies. We also saw BIDE cells. Then we also saw special test, that is G6PD enzyme assay, through which you can conclusively tell it is G6PD deficiency. Lastly, in immune hemolytic anemias, two important diseases we discussed were HDN, in which RH incompatibility HDN we focused on. We saw how the disease is classified based on severity of clinical features. Then we saw the lab diagnosis wherein numerous NRBCs were there, reticulocytes were there, then Coombs test was positive. Then finally we discussed about autoimmune hemolytic anemia, where we saw two types, warm type and cold type, and we discussed the laboratory investigation in general. Only peripheral smear had some difference between warm type of AHA and cold type of AHA. With warm type, because of IgG, shows more of extravascular hemolysis and spherocytes, whereas cold type, because of IgM, shows agglutination in the peripheral smear. Both of these were positive for Coombs test. With this, we complete the topic of hemolytic anemias and we shall progress on to WBC disorders and end with the platelet and coagulation disorders in the subsequent classes.